Right, so getting started with Wikitree. What I'm going to try to do in the session is to tell you, first of all, why you should use Wikitree, then a little bit on how to get started, and then I'm going to cover the basics. And for the basics, I'm going to give you step-by-step instructions. So it'll be kind of detailed instructions. And then I'm going to have a session called Beyond the Basics, where I'll not be giving you step-by-step instructions, but it's more just to give you a flavour of what's possible, because there is an awful lot to Wikitree, and I really don't want to bombard you with everything. So it's really just to give you a flavour of what's possible so that once you get into the basics and are starting to use it, then you can maybe start to investigate some of the things that I'm going to mention in the last section. So that's the plan for this session. So why Wikitree? First thing is, for those that aren't familiar with it, it is a single worldwide family tree. So what does that mean? Right, it's not like the trees that you would have on Ancestry where you have an account and you have all of your information that you want to put into that account in relation to your tree. And then you might have a cousin or a second cousin or whatever who also has their account and their information on the tree. And there may be overlaps between the two. And you might hold different information from your second cousin about some of your ancestors. The whole idea with this is that it's a single tree covering the world and going back in time. And that is kind of in a way mind-boggling if you think of it, that you could have that aim of a single tree. It's obviously because of how I've described it, it's all about sharing and it's based on collaboration. So if you're not into sharing information, Wikitree is definitely not for you because that is the basis on which it works. And like everything, because it's all about personal information, it tries as best as it can to get the balance between privacy and openness. Very importantly, it is free, so it is not a subscription site, and it is open to everyone to participate, everyone that wants to subscribe. But you have to register, and I'll explain a little bit about that. It also will argue that it's trying to be the most accurate tree, and the reason for that is that because of the whole idea of collaboration, you can therefore, if you see that there is information that is incorrect in this single tree, you can go in and change it. Now, that in itself creates kind of management issues, which I'll discuss. But the whole idea is we all know how subscription sites, one of the problems is information goes onto a site that is incorrect, and then people copy it and copy it like mad, such that if you have an accurate tree, but there are all these inaccurate trees, it looks like the inaccurate is the right one because there's multiple cases of it, and so that can cause problems. Then the idea as well is that it's Google searchable. It's got links, URL links, as they would call it, so that you can copy those links to people. So it's not because it's not behind a paywall. If you put in a name, and it's on Google, it will find it. Or also, we're now into the whole world of AI, and because it is open. AI can find the information get put onto Wikitree, and so that can be very useful in terms of providing information and what we would say is reasonably accurate information. You still need to check it as always, but accurate information. on family trees. It's also, last but not least, it is managed by volunteers, which I think is very important because the whole idea is these are people who are actually doing research themselves. So it's not a commercial operation. And therefore, because they are familiar with how to research and how they are developing their trees, hopefully they try to develop a system that is suitable for you putting on your information. And then particularly for those of you who have North of Ireland ancestry, we being the society, the North of Ireland Family History Society, we are using it to publish the research that we carry out on all of our DNA projects. So therefore, we're building up a whole database of information that we think will be useful and available to everyone. And our ultimate aim, and particularly my ultimate aim, is that it should be the go-to place if you're doing North of Ireland research. And the more people that participate, the more we will all benefit from it in terms of North of Ireland ancestry. So that is a particular aim of mine, and I would say of the society as well. So where do you start? First thing is about joining Wikitree. Although it's free and available to all, you do need to register, but it doesn't cost you a penny. So you need to create an account. And there's three levels of membership. There's guest, then there's family member, and then there's wiki genealogist. And I've put 3 stars against it because I would suggest that's where you all want to get to. Because presuming that when you're using Wikitree, not only do you want to look at things, you want to contribute and you want to participate in the collaboration. And you need to be at that highest level of membership in order to do that. So if you try to do something and it doesn't let you, you know that you haven't got to that level of membership, that you're maybe just in as a guest member and you need to look at your account and get it up to that level of membership. So the Wikitree genealogist, Wikitree is all about badges as well. You get badges for depending on what you do. So you can see there that's the green badge of a wiki genealogist. And one of the key things that you need to do is sign what they call the honor code. And I'll look at that in a wee bit more detail in the next slide. And once you do that, you're allowed to create and edit any number of profiles. You can add any number of images. You can receive private messages. You can control the level of privacy. And you can also add to what are called trusted lists. And I'll talk about that later on. You won't get any advertisements, whereas if you're in as a guest, there are advertisements. You can monitor the activity, both your activity and other activity using the concept of tags. You can confirm DNA relationships, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. And you can participate in projects, and I'll be talking about that. So here is the honor code. It's a little bit twee in terms of the fact that you sign this, but I think it is useful to go through the 8 points of the honor code because it does give you a flavour of what Wikitree is all about. So the first thing is that it's all about collaboration, as I've already said, and that means that there's one profile per person. And I'm going to explain what a profile means, but it's going back to that thing of it's this single tree, so there should be only one profile for every person that either currently exists or ever existed in the world. And that's an important part of it. It's also all about accuracy, and I refer to that. So when you sign the honor code, you are committing to also fix mistakes. So it's no good saying, oh, it's rubbish in this. I've looked up this, and there's rubbish about my great grandfather. The whole idea with Wikitree is that you can actually go in and change that. So the aim, therefore, is to make it as accurate as possible. And when you're a Wikitree genealogist, that is what you must commit to doing. Also, to participate with courtesy and respect. So, yes, you might find inaccurate information, but don't poo-poo whoever put that information on. Just be nice to them and explain why you are making the changes, and I'll explain how you might approach that. You also need to respect privacy and also respect copyright. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on as well, and particularly in relation to images. Also give credit, so acknowledge those that have given information and participated in Wikitree. Keep the information as free and open as possible. Yes, privacy is important, but you must not use that as an excuse to close things down and not let others collaborate. And then last but definitely not least is at the heart of Wikitree is the use of sources and citations. And that is used to resolve conflicts. Because as I've said, the whole idea is because it's a single tree, it really needs to be managed well, and you can get conflicting information, but because it is based on actual sources of information, that is then used to try to come up with what is the most accurate information about the particular profiles and people in your family trees. Up front, I'm going to talk just about two optional add-ins, because one of the benefits, because it's a volunteer-driven site, is that people are always developing little better ways of doing certain things. And so therefore, there's actually quite a few add-ons that you can put to Wikitree that will help you. And why I'm doing this up front is that these are two particular add-ons that I have used and I use, so that sometimes whenever I'm showing you in the step-by-step instructions, it may look different from what you see on your screen. And that's because I have applied these, and therefore um, those are the reasons why it might look differently. So I would encourage you to use these two. These are probably the most commonly used add-ons in relation to Wikitree. One is just called the Wikitree browser extension, and it does things like it can automatically fill in the gender information if you put in a name. It can do automatic biographies. It gives you a little clipboard that you can use to put in, hold information that you can copy and paste into multiple profiles. Got loads of things in it. I wouldn't even say a tenth of it, but it really is a very useful add-on. And then the Wikitree sorter, which is all about sources, and I'll talk a little bit in detail about that later on. But as I've said, sources are a fundamental part of Wikitree, so it is important that you do this properly. And this particular tool, add-on tool, is really good in helping you do that. So entering your tree. So you've maybe got a tree like this. This is my particular tree, and you maybe got it on Family Tree Maker. You might have it on Ancestry, wherever you might have it. And I would encourage you to put it also onto Wikitree. So I'm not necessarily saying that you use Wikitree exclusively. You can still use Ancestry or whatever products you want. But I would encourage you to at least put your main family lines. You might not put in all the siblings and so on, but at least if you put on your main family lines, that's a really good start. So what I would say is when you register, you end up with a profile for yourself. And that is the starting point. So this is here, this is me. And probably the logical way would then be to add the profile of your father and your mother and go like that. I would actually, oh, pardon me, I would recommend going the other way round, starting here and going down this way. And I'll explain why, because it's more efficient way to do it because once you add profiles, it knows the parents and it automatically fills them into the biographies. So that's why I would suggest going back down and then ending up with yourself as opposed to putting them in this direction. So that's just to explain a approach, and it's a little kind of tip that does things much more efficiently. So, person profiles. As I say, they are the basic building blocks of Wikitree, and each person has a profile page, and there should only be one profile page per person. If you find that there are two, because people can accidentally put on a profile of a person that's already there. There is the concept of merging, and I'll explain a little bit about that later on. So you can merge them all into so that there's only one profile per person. And then each profile page has a Wikitree ID. So for example, the page that relates to me has the Wikitree ID Johnston 3146. And what that is your birth surname, and then it's just a sequential number. So I was the 3,146th person to put on a Johnston profile onto Wikitree. And each profile has a profile manager, and that is usually the person that created the profile. But in time, those people maybe can either have left Wikitree, they may have died or whatever. So there's a concept of orphaned profiles. And they encourage you to adopt profiles if it's an area or a person that you're particularly interested in. It will tell you that there's no profile manager for this particular profile, and you can then go and adopt that profile. And I would encourage you as well, if you do adopt that profile, to actively look at it and try to improve it and see if you can add to it and add ancestors and so on. Because sometimes what I would find, a lot of these profiles may be for people that are not familiar, say with Northern Irish research, and they maybe haven't therefore got a lot of information on the profiles or haven't been able to find the ancestors of these particular people. And we can really add to that if we know Northern Irish research, or that applies to any other country as well in terms of adding information to Wikitree. So, in order to take you step by step through things, I would suggest, again, going back as far as you can, you need to start with a record. And because my pedigree chart is already on Wikitree, so I can't use that to show you exactly what to do. So I selected a family, the Arthur's family that I was researching as part of the Island McGee DNA project. And so I'm starting with this record, which is from, as you can see, First Island McGee Presbyterian Church baptisms. And it is a record set that we in the society have transcribed. And we've got baptisms. You can see this is a particular baptism going back to 1855. So it's prior to civil registration in Ireland. And you've got James Arthur's, and his father is also James Arthur. So I'm just calling him James Arthur Sr. for the purposes of differentiating them. And then his mother is Margaret Ann Savage. And when he was baptized, they were living in the townland of Dundresin in Island McGee. And this is the date of birth and the date of the baptism. So you've got, in fact, in this record, you've got three people. You've got the father, the mother, and then the baptized child. So you've got three profiles to create. So I'm going to explain how you will create those three profiles. Which you can then add to and add information. So you can see this is me. I'm telling you when I'm born and where I was born, etc. Um, but basically, if you go up to the top of your profile, you can see there that on the menu it says add, and you bring down the list, and then you go to new person profile. So you're starting with a completely new person separated from me. So it's nothing in this case in particular, it is nothing to do with me. But it could be your great great grandfather or whatever you are adding. But they're separate from you at this in terms of your family tree. So that's where you start off. So you're creating a new person profile. And if you do that, you get a form to complete. And it's all the usual information that you would think of adding. So it's name, date of birth, date of death, place of birth, etc. So you start to fill that in. And if we look for, we're talking, starting with James Senior, James Arthur's Senior. So if we look at what we can add, so where I've got the arrows shows the fields that we can fill in. So James is his first name at birth. Arthur's is his last name at birth. Now, if you think of it, from that baptismal register, we don't actually know um, James, any date information in relation to James other than the baptism of his son. So what the really good thing about um, Wikitree is these buttons here, estimated and estimated slash uncertain or just uncertain. And I find this very useful to put information in about people because it's really important when you enter and create a profile that you put some date information and some locational information so that somebody who is looking at that can recognize where it might kind of fit in, for example, into their tree. If they come across, they're looking for other authors that, for example, they want to see if they fit into their tree. So if they've got an approximate date and an approximate place, that is extremely useful. So what I would do is I have a little rule that if it's a baptismal record, I would say that on average their father is 30 years old. So if you remember back to the baptism, it was 1855. So I'm saying, therefore, that his father, James Arthur Sr., was born about 1825. But I've marked it as estimated so that people know that that isn't a definitive date, but that is an approximate date. And then I'm saying because, and this is where it's advantageous working in a particular area that you know, and I am very involved with Island McGee, so I know that Arthur's is a surname that goes back many generations in Island McGee. So therefore, it's probably highly likely that James was born in Island McGee. So I am saying that the birth location is Island McGee, County Antrim, Ireland, but I'm marking it as uncertain. The other thing when you're putting in birth locations, and I would say again, in a Northern Irish context, what you should put in is if you know the full information, you should be putting in townland, parish, county, country. If you were in the States, it would be it would be kind of a similar hierarchy like that. but it's getting all of the information that you know about a location in sequential order. Now, although the James Jr. and the family were living in Dundressin, and I can get that from the baptismal record, I wouldn't be too sure that he is born in Dundressin in 1825, but I would guess that maybe he originally comes from the parish of Almagee. But if I thought it was Dundressin, I would then be saying Dundressin, Almagee, County Antrim, Ireland. So it's that sequence of townland, parish, county, and then country. And the county, we normally in Ireland actually write the word County Antrim, as in this case. So that's how you would enter the basic information. And we don't know anything at this stage about his death or death location. So it's then just a matter of clicking on continue and going to the next stage. And when you click on that, this is where Wikitree is slightly different from other sites. Because it is this worldwide family tree, the very first thing that you do when you put in some basic information is that it checks to see, is that James Arthur's already on the database? So we know that we're looking for a James Arthur's in 1825, born about 1825. So it comes up with a list of potential matches. And it's up to us to look at those to see, is James Arthur's already there? Now, it tries to help you by putting in these, it says here that this is a partial birth location match, and it actually is an actual birth date match because it's this James now, the surname isn't the same. It's James MacArthur, whereas we're looking for James Arthur's, I should say. And so it does kind of help you, and you can look through these. You can get to the stage where you can really do it quite quickly. You don't really, if you focus on these, if you're pretty certain of the locations and so on, you can look through these very quickly. And but in this case, I'm looking and I'm thinking, well, maybe it could be James MacArthur that there is some kind of thing there. So I by clicking on James MacArthur, I can have a look at that profile in more detail. So if I click on it and I then see the profile of James MacArthur. And very quickly, I can see that it's not my man. It's not James Arthur's because you can see that he's the husband of Jane McBride. And we know that we're talking about Margaret Ann Savage. So I can fairly quickly dismiss that. So I go back to the match list. Now, if I did find that it was that person, I would then just click on this is the person, and then that will take me to the profile for that, and I can then work from that and look and see, is there any information about his ancestry that is already there that I haven't got, for example, in my tree. And so that is where the more people that, as I say, from the north of Ireland that participate, the more we're all going to benefit because we're kind of, Northern Ireland is really good for Wikitree because we're kind of a kind of a somewhat kind of closed community with a lot of interrelations. So the more people that we put on, the more chance you're going to get that maybe a whole branch of your tree is already on and maybe with more additional information that you haven't got. So that's the benefit of us all participating. But in this case, I'm saying that none of these is the match. So I go down to the bottom and click on none of these is the match. So the next stage then, as I say, fundamentally, sources are so important on Wikitree. So it asked me, what is the source of the information that you've just provided? So I there enter the details, and I'm saying that he is the father of James Arthurs Jr., who is recorded that is recorded in First Alan McGee Presbyterian Church baptisms. And so I've given the reason for the information that I've got, so that I then add this as a new person. And when I add this as a new person, it actually doesn't give me initially the full profile. It actually gives me an opportunity to add some additional information if I know it. So things like the prefix. So this would be, again, with Alan McGee, for example, a lot of master mariners there. So they would be captains. So if I knew James Arthur's was a master mariner, I'd be putting in captain into the prefix. Um, if I knew, for example, he was Jim, he was known as Jim, rather than James, I can put that under a nickname. Other last names and suffixes it's more particularly relevant for women, and I'll explain that when we get to his wife. So here then is the completed profile, and I should, sorry, have also mentioned this. One of the things that I find is it's actually quite hard to find how to get to the full profile, but this little symbol here is how you will get to the full profile. So if you click on this, it gets you to the completed profile. So here we've got James Arthur's. You can see it's added the information that we put in, and it's marked uncertain that 1825 and Alan McGee. No death information. You can see the information there. And then it's started a biography. So it's just got the beginnings of a biography, which is James was born about 1825. And then, very importantly, it's got the source of the information. So there you can see the biography and you can see the source. And then, as I said, every profile has an ID. So based on the birth surname and then a sequential number. So James Arthur Sr. has been given the ID Arthur's 748. And then here is information on the profile manager. So because I created it, I am the profile manager, and then it gives you some information on when I created it and when it was edited and so on. So now I go back to the record. So what's the next? The next person to add then is James's wife. So this is Margaret Ann Savage. So how do I do that? If I go back to the completed profile for James, you can see there that it says spouse question mark. So if I click on that, that takes me to the profile for his wife. So I'm saying that I'm adding the spouse, and then I can either create a new profile for his spouse, which is what I'm going to do, or if I knew for whatever reason that his spouse was already on Wikitree, I can then do connect to an existing profile, and it would ask me for the Wikitree ID of that profile, and I can add that person as the spouse of James Arthurs. But in this case, I'm creating a new profile, so I just go continue, and it's the same as before. I get a form that I can complete and add all the basic information about Margaret Ann Savage. So here we've got the information. So Margaret is her first name. Then we've got a middle name for her, so we separate that out and we put it into the field of middle name. Then Savage. Now this is where for females, you would then put in that her current or married last name is Arthurs. And then again, we don't have a date for her birth or a location for her birth. So I usually find, sorry, that spouses are usually 2 years younger than the husband. So I'm saying therefore that the estimated birth date for Margaret is 1827, and unlike Arthur's, I know Savage is not a recognised Island McGee surname. So I'm guessing that she has come in from somewhere else. Um, but it might be that she's from Island McGee, but my starting point is to say no, not Island McGee. Probably local, so I'm gonna say that I'm gonna estimate that she's from somewhere in County Antrim and that is in Ireland. Or I could just put Ireland if I wasn't confident about the County Antrim. And then I would go to continue, and then it looks for matches. Now, in contrast to James, the husband, it can't find any matches in the database that are resembling Margaret Ann Savage. So I just then click on none of these as a match because there's none there to match with. And then it asks me for details of the marriage. Now, I don't have any details, so I don't need to fill these in. Or I might think of putting in a potential date for the marriage and mark it uncertain. But in this case, I'm not going to put any marriage details in, and I'm just going to go continue. And then again, sources, so important on Wikitree. So I explain that this is the mother of James Arthurs Jr., and I've got the information from the baptismal register of First Island McGee Presbyterian. So here we have now a second profile completed. So it doesn't take me too long to do that. You can do that in, I'm going to say initially, probably it might take you 15 minutes, but eventually when you get faster at doing it, you can do a profile easily in 5 minutes. So then we want to add James Jr. So again there it says children question mark. So that's what we click to add the profile of James Jr. And you can see there, I'm not going to go through the whole detail again, but I've added the information. And then this is appearing in the final profile of the child. So you can see there, he was born on the 30th of November, 1855 in Dundressin, Island McGee, County Antrim, Ireland, because we know now the townland for James Arthurs Jr. And you can see there what I was explaining, that it's important to start at the oldest line of your tree because it automatically fills in that in the biography that he was born in 1855, but that he is the son of James Arthurs and Margaret Savage. And it puts these in as what are called URLs. So if you click or hyperlinks. If you click on that, that will take you to the profile of his father or his mother. So that is why it is much more efficient to go back as far as you can in your tree and come forward to you as opposed to the other way around. And again there, it's marked in the source of the information. So now I've looked again at the baptismal register and I find that there is another child in the baptismal register of James and Margaret. So I then go and click on brothers and sisters for this James Arthurs Jr. And then that takes me in to another edit page and I complete the information and I get a profile of the sibling of James Arthurs Jr. So this is Robert John Arthurs, and he's actually born before James, so in 1853. So now from those two records on the baptismal register, I've now created 4 profiles in relation to that Arthur's family. So, it really doesn't take a lot of time or effort to put those in. Now, when you then get, and I'm not going to go into the whole length of things, But when it gets to down to where you want to then add them to you because your they're going to your great grandparents or whatever it is. So that is where you, instead of creating a new profile, want to connect to an existing profile. So in this case, I know that I'm Johnson 3146, and just to confirm it, it comes up in a little pop-up to say this is me and who my parents are, to make sure that you're putting in the right ID. And then by clicking on that, that adds you an existing profile to the Arthur's family, if that was the case. As I say, I'm just mixing families here just to show you how to do it. And then you want to maybe start, you've done some more research on the family and you want to edit information on a profile that's already there. So I couldn't find any more information on James and Margaret and their two children in Almagee. I looked through the various Almagee records, nothing at all. And that for me is maybe an indication that they emigrated. And it can be very difficult if they've emigrated to America and you don't know where in America they've emigrated to. But for people in Northern Ireland, a lot of them go across to Scotland. And so what I always do is I look at Scotland's people. And sure enough, when I started to search on Scotland's people, I found a record for that second child, Robert John. Now, I started off, of course, by putting in Arthur's because that is the recognized surname. But I then thought, quite often an S can kind of disappear. So I put in Robert John, Arthur, and I put in because one of the great things about Scottish records is that there's a lot of additional information about the family that you can search on. So it asked me for the maiden name of his mother. So I put in Savage, and sure enough, this record came up, and the age fits perfectly because it's a death record, unfortunately, died in 1885 in Cathcart. And when I then, so that was the index, that's the index on Scotland's people. Then I decided just to make sure, because I wasn't absolutely certain, but I then paid for the actual record. And when I paid for the record, it virtually kind of convinced me that it was the right person because not only is the maiden name of the mother Savage, but it tells me that the maiden name is Margaret Ann Savage, and then that the father is James Arthur, a labourer. So I was pretty certain that this was the death record for Robert John. So now I want to add that to Wikitree. So how do I do that? So I've got his profile. I then go to the little edit icon, which is like a pencil, and I click on that, and that allows me to edit his profile. So that takes me to the edit form, and I want to do two things. I want to obviously add his death information, so 1885 and Cathcart in Scotland, but I also want to add this other last name of Arthur because I think that's important to let future people that are looking at the record know that if they're looking, for example, for marriage information, that they, as well as searching for Arthur's, that they should also um, look at it with minus the S on the end. So those are the three bits of information that I've added about Robert John Arthur's. And then I go down the profile page and I add some additional information. So the biography, it was saying that he was born in 1853, the son of, but I then add that he passed away in 1885 in Cathcart and that he died from acute phthisis. And then I also add this news source that I've used. So it's Scotland's People, and this is the website. And then I've just done a copy and paste of the record from the index that I showed you earlier on. So it gives you all the basic information. So anybody that was wanting to look at that record, and going back to what I was talking earlier on about copyright, you cannot copy the actual record. And I see people that do that, but they're not meant to. They're breaching copyright. And I see continually that being done on Ancestry and so on. You are not supposed to copy these records. You can copy links to the records, but not the actual records themselves. They are copyrighted. So I can give sufficient information. This is all about somebody coming along later on who thinks they might be related to Robert John and wanting to be able to maybe do some additional research themselves. So I am giving them sufficient source information there so that they can go into Scotland's People and find the record and look at it themselves if they want to do so. And then I want to save changes, and they just ask you for a reason that you have saved the change, and I'm saying that it's a new source, and then I do a full save, and it brings me into a fully now edited profile. So you can now see we've got both the birth and the death information for Robert James, and you can see how it's presented in the biography and in the sources. So how I've got all that information into the system. So how do I extract information out? So if you go back to the profile here, this is the where the menu options are for getting information out from Wikitree. So if we look, the default view that you're getting is what they call the family view. So this includes this blue section, which gives you the direct family of Robert John Arthurs. So it's saying that he's the son of, he's the brother of, sorry, and if he had a spouse and children, they would be added there. So this is the family view in relation to Robert John Arthurs. But if you go to ancestors, so click on ancestors, and you get this view. So this, and because I haven't got a lot on Robert John Arthur's, I'm just showing you it for me. So this is a full view of my family tree. So these are all of my ancestors. And by clicking on any of these, that will take you to the profile page of that particular person. But if you look at the top in this tree apps, again, reflecting the fact that Wikitree is run by volunteers, there are loads of apps that people have developed on how to present your family tree. And so by clicking on the tree apps, that gets you a link to the various ways that you can extract your family tree. And my favorite way is what's called a dynamic tree. So this is how it basically looks. And you can go in any direction by clicking on these plus signs, and it can take you in all sorts of directions. And then you can get a printout of whatever format you want in relation to whatever part. Because one of the things, if you think of it, a family tree on Wikitree is kind of endless because it's this one world tree. It's not like it's your own account with your own little tree. It can go in all sorts of directions. And so this dynamic tree allows you to go in whatever direction you want and produce a tree that is tailored to your particular needs. But there's lots of other formats as well. So if you're into fan charts, so this is a fan chart of my tree. So this is me in the middle, my dad, my mum, and my grandparents, and my great-grandparents, and my great-great-grandparents. So you can do all sorts of fancy things. Whatever way you can think of, I can tell you somebody will have developed a tree app on Wikitree to be able to produce the information. But also that was ancestors, if you want descendants. So this is me with my great-great-grandfather, Thomas Johnson. And if I clicked on that sorry, in the menu options, it allows you to get information on the descendants of that particular person. So you can see it gives you a little bit of summary information at the top. So it says that on Wikitree there's 2 children for that Thomas Johnson, 6 grandchildren, 48 great-grandchildren, 80 2 times great-grandchildren, so that includes me, that's where I kind of fit in, and 115 third great grandchildren. So that's a total of 251 descendants of that Thomas Johnson are on Wikitree. So phenomenal amount. And then the details are all here, and you can tailor this again with plus and minus signs to get into a format that you may want to see. So you can go up and down and get the details of the 251 descendants, and you can click on any of them to go in to have a look at their profiles. So that's the basics of Wikitree. And I think based on that, you should be able to go away and put in your ancestors onto Wikitree. You know, you saw my tree at the beginning, with probably most people, you know, you're talking about 40 to 50 people maybe. And you know, based on the step-by-step instructions that I've just given you, you should be able to go away now and put those people onto Wikitree. And that is just covering the basics. I am now going to give you a flavour of what I'm calling the bells and whistles. So these are other things that you can do, but I would suggest I'm not going to go into great detail on them. It's just to give you a flavour of what's possible. The key thing that I've just covered are the basics, and that is important just to get you started onto Wikitree and get the basic information on. And then if you really kind of get into it, as you know, a lot of people do, and a person that's gets a kind of addicted to Wikitree, it's called a Wikitreer. So if you become a Wikitreer, then you might start to investigate the bells and whistles. So I'm really, as I say, this is about giving you a flavour of what's possible. So if we look at biographies, and we talked about some basic things on adding sources. If you look at the right-hand side, although on my screen it's on the left, but on the right-hand side under the biography, it tells you another way to add sources, which are called inline references or inline sources. So this is the default that we used, where we just had, it appeared under sources and references as an asterisk, and then the actual source. But inline means that you put it in the middle of your biography at the point in which you are providing the information. So here, this is my dad, and I'm saying that he was born in 1911, and then I put this inline reference. So I'm saying, and that's where I got the information. And then I'm giving some more information. And then I'm saying, and I got more information here. And I'm saying I got some stuff from the Public Records Office. And I put that here, and I put it here, and here, and here. So every time I put some information in to a biography, I then immediately after I put that information in, I say where I've got it, as opposed to just having a kind of a list at the end with an asterisk as this is. Um, and if you just look at examples, that's always the best way. But as I say, I always just look at this little section on the right, and it tells me how to do an inline reference. And the end result is that you get something like this. And so this, again, this is my dad. So this is this. It's just giving you a couple of paragraphs on his life. And I would suggest that maybe you maybe just do this with some of your profiles of people, of maybe ancestors that are particularly precious to you. You spend a little bit more time developing the biography for these people. And then if you do inline references, it gives them in numerical order, and you don't need to worry about the numbers because Wikitree produces those numbers automatically. I think it's good because as well, somebody looking at something like this, it might give them ideas as well on records that they weren't aware that existed. So you can see there, for my dad, I've got some information on his schooling, where he was educated, and it gives you, I've given the source of that information. So, microfilm numbers from Prony. And I've then also, it's important that you don't need to have official sources for everything. This one is a little bit about his occupation. And I've said that that is or a collection of his wife, Winifred Johnson. So you can put just, things like that. But the key thing is just putting in a source. And it is good practice in research is to be recording a source for all of the information that you collect. Because I can tell you, if you're like me, that a month later, you forget where you got the information from. Or you may have these pages of notes. I go into Prony and I can take pages of notes, and then in a year later I look at them, and I don't know what's what. Whereas if you put the immediate reference number onto Wikitree, that is really good in terms of being rigorous in your research. I mentioned earlier on about Wikitree Sourcer. If you are, one of the things about Wikitree, it's not like Ancestry where there are databases of record sets that you can use. So it doesn't include databases of records. But Wikitree Sourcer helps you to search for a source. And you can see there, you maybe can't see this because it might be under your pictures, but if you can see this icon here, that will appear if you've implemented Sourcer. This appears on your browser. It's like a little kind of one inside squared brackets. And if you are in a profile, so in this case, Robert John Arthur's, and you can search all of these databases. Now, for those that have subscriptions, you need to have logged into them. In fact, all of them where you need to register, you need to be logged in, whether it's a subscription or not. But what this does is this takes, if we're looking at Family Search, which is a free database, it takes the information that you have put in for that profile and goes and looks at Family Search to see are there any records that it can find in relation to this Robert John Arthur's that are in Family Search. Or, as I say, if you've got a subscription to Ancestry, does the same on Ancestry, Find a Grave, Find My Past, My Heritage, all the big databases. But very importantly for us in the north of Ireland, fairly recently, they have added Irish Genealogy, .ie, and the National Archives of Ireland census records, and also the Catholic church registers in the National Library of Ireland. You can also see it's got Scotland's people. So I could have used that to search for his death record in Scotland's people. And that is a very good way of, from Wikitree, searching in all of the big databases for information. So as well as helping you to find records for the profiles that you've added, Wikitree Sourcer also then helps you to record that. And it does it in a proper way. I do it quite simply, but if you want to do a proper citation for a source should include the author's name, the name of the source, publication date, and the source of the publication. So if you've then found a particular record in one of those databases, you can then get it to properly word the source, which you can then directly add to Wikitree. And this is what it does if it gets a source in irishgenealogy.ie for a birth registration. And it includes a link to the image so that then you can just click on this and that will take you to the image of, in this case, the birth record, or in this case, the marriage record. So Wikitree Sourcer is a tremendous add-on to allow you to search and deal with sources. Also, on Ancestry, okay, it is a paid subscription site, but for a lot of the records, it can create what they call sharing records, that where someone who doesn't have a subscription can actually see the record that you have used. So again, reflecting my work on Island McGee, I've been working a lot with crew lists on that are on Ancestry, and as far as I'm aware, they're only available on Ancestry. So if it means that somebody who hasn't got a subscription to Ancestry wouldn't normally be able to see this record, but if I use Wikitree Sourcer, it gives me what is called a sharing version of Ancestry, so that a person looking at that profile, in this case, it is of a guy called James Hagan, and you can see there's the information on it that it's got from this record, his age and birth date, and that he was born in Island McGee, etc. And by clicking on this, what is quite a long hyperlink, but that will take them to this record that normally a person who doesn't have a subscription would not be able to get access to, but this allows them to access that particular record. I'd also remind you to, when you're working on the biographies, it's a good place to add family stories. I've just been doing the bare bones, as you can see, for those on the Arthur's family. But on lots of other profiles, when I get information on their lives, I add those. So I'm using a lot of sources such as newspapers and their obituaries, local events, court cases, to add a real kind of, on those biographies, it's like it's writing, maybe not a whole book or anything like that, but a good few paragraphs on their lives, and particularly the interesting events in their lives. If you can add, I mean, we've been doing some work on memorabilia, using memorabilia on Island McGee, and you can add oral recollections from the relatives or descendants. You can maybe add a context of what life was like, so you can use local history journals. There's various ideas there of what you can use. Or Prony, they've got diaries, letters, school records, workhouse records, historical maps. Occupations, often going back in time, if you look at the census records, it's maybe occupations that we don't recognize today, but you can find out a little bit of information on what they actually involved, and you can include those in the biographies. So it's really to give not only information on the person's life, but maybe a little bit of the context of what their life was like and what they did. So those can all be added to the biographies on Wikitree. I always think of Wikitree a little bit like Wikipedia for the masses. So if you think of famous people, notable people that you can look up on Wikipedia and you see all of their life and what they did, you can in fact do the same on Wikitree. And it actually is using exactly the same technology and the same idea, concept of sources and so on of information. So that's why it's called Wikitree, Wikipedia. It's exactly the same concept. You can also then add images. And those images, this is my uncle, one of my uncles. So you can add photographs of people, you can add of places as well. So it can be anything that helps you, but also you can add images of sources and you can identify them as sources. So here we've photographed all of the headstones of the various graveyards in Magee. So I can add those photographs to each of the profiles. And what you do is you actually a headstone may relate to 6 people, but you actually can add just it to one profile and then you link that to all the other relevant profiles. So it's only one copy relating to various people. Also, again, reflecting the what I was saying about memorabilia, we got on a day that we had down in Almagee, people brought in family Bibles, and I was able to photograph relevant pages of family Bibles. And here you can see this is what's known as the Templeton Family Bible. It's got lots of information that's all pre-civil registration in relation to quite a number of people. So I can put that image in once and then link it to all the various, what would that be, about nearly approaching 20 people that where their details are provided on their birth dates. So that can be very useful. Then there is the concept of research notes, and I also find this extremely useful. So if we go back to the Arthur's family, I did look up James Arthur's and Margaret Ann Savage in Almagee records to see if I could get a marriage, and I couldn't get a marriage. There was no detail of a marriage. But then when I did look at the Irish genealogy, I have got a potential marriage. The only thing is that it is quite a distance away, so it's in Akadui. So I'm really not sure whether it is the same couple. And so I can deal with that in a couple of ways. So I can put the marriage in and I can mark it as uncertain. Again, there's a facility to do that with marriages. Or I can add it as a research note. And what you do with research notes, so here we're in edit mode. So I can say there was a marriage in 1852 between a James Arthur. Now it's interesting, it is again Arthur, a labourer, and Margaret Ann Savage, a weaver. And then I've given the details, all of the details there. And I've also given the hyperlink to it. So that and then when you save it, it saves like this. Now, one of the things that I need to say is if you put at the end of it 4 tildes, those little wavy lines, what it does when you save it, it time stamps it and also with your Wikitree ID so that for this research note, anybody who looks at that at a later stage knows that I put it in and when I entered it. And that's quite important in terms of people coming along and looking at the James's profile. They can then see that I think that this might be a marriage, but I'm not certain because Akadui is really quite a distance away. from Ian McGee. So that, and those research notes can cover anything. You can just say, I have looked at, and there are no um, records, or you can say it might be such and such, or he might be the sibling of another thing. So the research notes, there's endless possibilities, and it's all about this whole thing of collaboration with others. Privacy. Obviously, again, because we're talking about personal information, so we need to be careful with privacy. But Wikitree, they have a very good system of managing privacy. And if you look at any profile, at this symbol in the top right hand left, right-hand side, sorry, right-hand side, it tells you the level of privacy that it has attached to that um, particular profile. And then if you go down here, and if you click on this, again, this symbol, it gives you more information on the level of privacy. So if we go in and we look, so it's saying that for this particular profile, it is open. So that means anyone can view the full profile and any member who has signed the honor code can edit it. And it's also then saying this is required for people born over 150 years ago or who died over 100 years ago. So basically this goes back to the whole accuracy thing that I was talking about. It's trying to balance collaboration with privacy. So, and if you look at any living person, so when you don't have a death in for a person, they are marked as unlisted. So if you would be worried about entering information and that being available to the world of a person that is still living, Wikitree handles that because as long as you don't have a death date in, it is marking that as unlisted and it says there's no public information and the name won't appear in search results or in directories. So basically, Wikitree handles the privacy levels itself. As you go and add information, when you start, for example, person may start as unlisted, but then you find out death information, and it starts to go through these various security levels. So you really don't need to worry about it. You can let it handle the with the defaults, although you can then manually change some things. So maybe there's an area in your family history that you want to record the information, but there's maybe problems about illegitimacy or whatever that you want to keep that private. So you can manually then alter the default levels of privacy. So hopefully it gets that balance right in terms of privacy and collaboration. But it really, I suppose, discourages you from being restrictive in terms of privacy levels um, for no particular reason. So the whole idea of it is it wants to try to be as open as possible. But there is a concept of a trusted list. And this is where the profile manager can allow someone else to also edit a profile that is maybe restricted. There are privacy restrictions. And if you can apply to the profile manager to be added to the trusted list, and that will give you full viewing and editing rights. And the whole idea is it's about allowing collaboration without sacrificing privacy. But as a profile manager, you need to consider things carefully before granting trusted list status. I mean, if it's someone that you know and are working and actively um, working with on a particular family's research, and you trust them and so on, you can add them. But there are circumstances, where people would apply, and I kind of I can be a little bit fact about why they're doing it, and I would maybe go back to them and say they've just asked me to be added to the list. I go back and say, well, why do you want to be added to the list? And sometimes it is for things like, oh, I just wanted to see. I mean, I have literally got things where I wanted to see if their brother was my best mate at school, and I wanted to get contact details for him. And I would, if that was the case, I would look and say, well, what was the brother's name, and see if I got that as the brother. And if it wasn't the brother, then I wouldn't give them trusted list. Or what I would do is, if there was a brother, I would, rather than give them trusted list status, I would um contact the particular person and say, look, I've got somebody who's trying to get the details of your brother. Are you happy enough for me to let them contact you? Or, things like that. So that's what I would do. Then related to that is the whole change history. So again, this little icon next to the edit icon, in fact, between it and the security privacy icon, is where it gives you a complete change history of the profile. So every change that is happens in a relation to a profile from when it is created to current day, it has a complete audit. So you can see here, this is James Arthur's now. I did this all in the last couple of days, but it tells me that I created it, and then I added his wife, and then I added his two children, and then I edited the biography. So it's a complete audit trail, and that is important in case something goes wrong, in case there are, and there can be situations where someone goes in and messes up things and hasn't got proper sources or mixes up people. So it means it allows you, if necessary, to either escalate it, and there is an escalation procedure within Wikitree if you're unhappy with what somebody has done, or you can revert back to the original. So it is really well managed. There are a couple of other sites that are whole world single trees, but to me they don't manage it in the same way as Wikitree does, and that is very important. Categories then. Profiles can be grouped together by the use of categories. And the whole idea of that is you can then focus research. And examples of categories might be a location. So, for example, in the Island McGee project, we would be using a category called Island McGee, Parish of Island McGee, to be able to analyze things further. You can do it for a graveyard, or you can do it for a topic. For example, Master Mariners of Ireland. There is a category for them, and it allows you to then be able to look at all of the profiles within that particular category and do work across the board in relation to a particular topic. How you create it, or how you add a category, is in the biography, above the biography, you get this little menu option icons, and you click on this one, and that opens a text box, and you start to type the category name, and then it gives you matching categories, and you select the one you want, and it appears above the biography heading, and also appears at the bottom of the profile page. So here's an example. So if we look at Belfast City Cemetery, which we have created as a category, and we actually manage it as an overall project. So you can see that this is on a profile. A category has been added of called Belfast City Cemetery Project. So that is above the biography. And then at the bottom of the profile itself, you will see that it tells you which categories this particular profile is in. So if I click on this Belfast City Cemetery, Belfast Antrim category, it then gives me information on the cemetery. So you can see lots of information here. And then it gives you a list in alphabetical order of all the people that are in that category. So you can see here at the point that I did this, we had 1,649 people in the category for city cemetery. So there's quite a long way to go. But you can see from here, for example, by clicking on this, which is um, maps, OpenStreetMap, you can get a map of where the city cemetery is located in Belfast. So there's lots of useful information here. You can click, you can get the find a grave site, Billions grave site, etc., etc. And then another thing which I like is you can start to produce maps. And one of the things that we are doing on Belfast City Cemetery project is we are looking at the origins of the people that are buried in the city cemetery, because basically it was created in the late 1800s when Belfast was growing rapidly, and the existing graveyards, which were managed by the various churches, became full and couldn't take any more graves. So the city corporation, or the Belfast Corporation at that time, then decided to create this city cemetery, which was at that stage in the edge of the city. And this was, as I say, when the massive growth of Belfast, and we a lot of those ancestors that are maybe buried there, people have lost track of where they came from originally. So by using maps and the information that we are adding to Wikitree, you can start to find out where they've come from. So if we look, this is a map that is zoomable into. So I've started off with the maximum level of zoom. So you can see Belfast City Cemetery project is somewhere about there, or City Cemetery is located somewhere about there. And you can see that it includes, and the red are births and the blue are deaths. So you can see that it includes people that were actually quite a few that were born in India, and also some that were born in Australia and New Zealand, and obviously quite a few that are buried in, or that are born in America. And also then there are a few people that actually died in America, who obviously wanted to be buried, or they probably actually aren't buried in the cemetery, but they're probably just commemorated on the headstones within the city cemetery project. And then if you zoom in, obviously, into the United Kingdom, you can see a picture of where they came from as well through the rest of the British Isles. So there's quite a lot are from various parts of England, Scotland, Wales, and the Republic of Ireland, as well as Northern Ireland. And then if you go in and literally focus in on the cemetery itself, and you get names at that stage of each of the things, so you can see there's actually very few people are actually living in the direct vicinity of the cemetery. But it's a really useful tool in getting a visual picture in relation to your analysis of whatever category you are you're using in terms of your research. Which leads us to the concept of projects. And I'm kind of really conscious of the time, but I'm nearing the end. So there's three types of projects in Wikitree. There's top level projects, which are very formal, and you must have two project leaders. And then, so for example, Ireland, country of Ireland is a project. They have a project, formal project, and you see there, I'm a member of it because I've got a badge reflecting what I just said about Wikitree. You get a badge for when you do something of significance. So because I've joined the Ireland project, I have an Ireland badge. Then there are sub projects, and often these are subdivisions of these top level projects. So, for example, there's one on cemeteries in Ireland is a sub-project of the main Ireland project. And then there's what's called free space projects. And these are much less formal, can be started by anybody, and you can at a later stage turn them into a top level project. And these are the ones that we use for our DNA projects. So this is the one that we have for the Alan McGee project. You have what's called a free space page. Free space page is the best way to think about it is like a profile page for a thing. You know, the normal way is that profiles are for um, people, but you can actually create these free space pages for things, and those things can be anything. It can be, in this case, a parish of Almagee and DNA testing in that parish. It can be, I've seen them for where people do house histories. So it can be a house, and then you can link into all the people that have lived in that house. I've even seen a weird one, which was where they had got they found their grandparents' wedding invitation list, all the people. So they created a free space page for that invitation list, and then they researched all the people that were invited to their grandparents' wedding. Or you can get, there's projects on sinking of various ships during the war, or there's just endless possibilities of projects that can be created. As long the whole idea is that they eventually link into people, and you can link them into the profiles on Wikitree. And this is the sort of thing that you have in Alan McGee. So at the bottom of the page, of that page that I showed you previously, you've got links, and that can create that. This one links to Alan McGee, so you can see all the people in Alan McGee. But then you can split it up into townland. So this is Mullockboy Townland. So you can use it to analyze the information that you put onto Wikitree. And then you can nest pages. So this is where we've got a free space page for Alan McGee Methodist Church. And we can link into, for example, some of the founding members of the church and the person that donated the land, etc., etc. So you can do all sorts of things with free space pages. Merges, I mentioned at the beginning, you really should only have one profile per person. So if you do find two or more profiles relating to the same person, you need to merge those two profiles into one. And you get down at the bottom of the page, you'll find this thing which is initiate a merge. And that's where you kick off the merging process. And whoever basically what happens is both people need to approve, both profile managers need to approve the merge initially. If it then isn't approved, then other people it can be escalated. But whoever between the profile managers, they need to carefully select I'm calling it correct information, because sometimes there can be conflicting information on the two profiles. And what I would say is where there is conflicting information, this is where, again, research notes comes in. So you maybe select one, but also then say, but there is a possibility that it could be this, and put that into the research notes. It's great where sometimes you find that two profiles have been created because people have come to that person from a different direction. Maybe somebody has the birth information and they've created that profile, and somebody then has been working maybe on a graveyard and found the death information but didn't match it up with the birth. So then if you merge the two profiles, then you get the full picture of that person. And that is really good when that kind of comes about. Can't leave things without mentioning a little bit about DNA testing, but that could be a whole talk in itself. Um, it's quite different how Wikitree deals with DNA testing. People think they have to upload their results, but no, what happens is you just put the details of your tests onto your own personal profile. So in my case, I would be putting in that I tested on FTDNA, and I've also tested it at other places. Or if I was a male and had done Y-DNA, I would record that. Then what happens is Wikitree knows who at what levels in your tree should match with you. And they put that in, the information in relation to your test on that profile. And so that somebody going to the profile of your great grandfather, say, will see that I have tested and where I've tested, and therefore that I should be appearing on their match list. So that is the whole idea. Um, and you can see that there it produces a lot of other information in relation to identifying potential test takers, does a lot on the more complex X chromosome, integrates with GEDmatch, also recently integrates with FTDNA. And then there's various there's other tools to help you with what's called, there's a ancestor confirmation aid, which helps you to confirm relationships on your family tree. And so this is what it looks like. So this is my second great grandfather, Alexander Watt. And you can see that on his profile automatically, Wikitree has put the information of all these people that have tested that are descendants of Alexander Watt. And so it allows you to be able to look at that, and it includes me, of course. But it allows, if you're looking at his profile and you think, oh, he's my blood relative in some shape or form, then you should be starting to look for matches of these people in your match list. As I say, FTDNA have recently integrated with Wikitree, and you can now on your family tree, you can put your Wikitree ID here in under the heading of genealogy family tree. So here, this is me. I've been able to link in with my, it's as simple as putting in your Wikitree ID. It takes you less than a minute to do that. And then that means someone looking at their match list and seeing that you're a match can then look at your tree on Wikitree. And a more recent thing is if you've done Y testing on a thing called the Big Y Match Time Tree, it overlays your Y line if you were a male. I obviously doesn't do it for me, but you can see here, these are two testers that have both done Big Y, and you can see where it is over laying their Y lines, and you can see there where they intersect. So it's showing the intersect point, which coincide with that, and you can see the date there. So it all links in. So it can be extremely useful in terms of analysing Y DNA. So you'd be glad to know I'm at the end. And in conclusion, what I would say is that Wikitree provides you with a place that you can record your family history to allow you to share it with others, which is very important, but also to share it for posterity, because we all don't live forever. So, and we would sometimes worry about what happens to all the effort that we put into our trees. So the whole idea is if you put it onto Wikitree, it's easily shareable by your descendants wherever they may be in the world, and however interested they are in your tree. It's also useful for adding to your research, leveraging your DNA. I've only covered a little bit about the whole DNA side of things. And then the whole idea is, and particularly say the stuff that we're doing on Island McGee, where you can contribute to the wider genealogical community by doing maybe little mini projects of your own in relation to graveyards or local graveyards or whatever. And I'm just going to give you a challenge to end, which is I'm going to say that in the next month, I really want you to enter at least 30 of your ancestors onto Wikitree. I showed you hopefully at the beginning the basics. So that's all that I'm saying. I'm not saying doing all that fancy stuff that I showed at the end. Really just covering the basics. And I think easily within a couple of days of effort, a couple of nights of effort, you should be able to put in at least 30 of your ancestors. If you've already started and done your ancestors, maybe think of putting 30 other people on. It's a really simple challenge that I hopefully, if I've done my job correctly in this session, you should be able to go away and do that.